What's a movie or series that is way ahead of its time? Write in the comments what you think about it. Share your stories. Have fun watching. Story 1. This is going to sound pretentious, maybe, because it has a cult following. But The Prisoner. It was really the first show really reflecting some of the major elements of the counterculture of the 60s in a way that was approachable for a wider audience. The psychedelic trappings and blatant anti-government themes were balanced by the thriller secret agent aspects, and helped by the idea that it was an extension of Danger Man, and using the trope about sci-fi making hard discussions possible allowed them to hit a bunch of things in that run. Special effects budget it had not, though. Seriously, guys. He's being chased by a weather balloon? Story 2. Ren and Stimpy. A kids' cartoon from the late 80s/early 90s that pushed so many boundaries. There was an episode about space madness, cabin fever, one about hygiene, Ren losing his teeth from cavities, one about the subjectiveness of happiness, the Happy Happy Joy Joy song episode, and one about how hard it can be being homeless. In hindsight, definitely not a kids' show. I still loved it though. LOL. Story 3. Arthur. Not only did that show have adult references like South Park and Beavis and Butthead at one time, and the occasional innuendo before it really had become a very normal thing for kids' TV, but it hit on some pretty serious topics and had some real scenarios in it. Buster's parents were divorced, DW's pet bird died, Arthur got lost one time, Binky was held back a grade, Arthur and Buster were separated as friends for a while. And that's just some of the things that I remember from episodes when I was a young kid in the 90s. It got even more deeper with some topics in the 2000s in my middle to late childhood, with things like Mrs. McGrady getting cancer, a kid had Asperger's syndrome, and Grandpa Dave got Alzheimer's. The show touched on stealing, bullying, family problems, disabilities, class differences, fears, injuries, guilt, and much, much more. Mr. Ratburn would even end up being gay, and the kids would go to a gay wedding in a later season after I had already become an adult. And while the show changed to the point when I lost interest, mostly because the very flat, modern animation bothers the hell out of me, I still think back to it fondly, and even still watch old episodes from my childhood from time to time. It was a good show, and I think every kid should watch it. It's a mature show for children, and I am glad I got to grow up with it. Story 4. Metal Gear Solid 2. Kojima predicted the future 2 decades ahead of time. The story was nothing short of phenomenal. Hard for me to put into words how amazing it is. What a gameplay without commentary if you don't like gaming. It's a mind-blowing experience. Story 5. Mad Men. The overarching thesis was that the American dream is one big commercial. As I get older, I feel more and more that the show really nailed how it feels for time to go by, if that makes sense. We're not Forrest Gump participating in everything. We're on the sidelines and often too busy to keep up. Story 6. What's a movie or series that is way ahead of its time? My answer would be The Apostrophizer, starring Marky Grammer. The story is totally forward-thinking and futuristic, yet also based in the here and now. In The Apostrophizer, Marky goes from space station to space station explaining that when you write things like ahead of its time, what you're really writing is ahead of it is time, and that the error looks especially dumb when you only had to edit a single sentence in order to check whether you were using the apostrophe correctly or not. The final scene is badass, with Marky blowing up all of the stations and saving the universe. Story 7. Mission Hill was a one-season cartoon from the late 90s or early 00s, and the only giveaway that it was not made today is that you don't see anyone using mobile phones. Fucking loved that show, but no one else seems to remember it. It has the guy that voiced SpongeBob before SpongeBob was SpongeBob Haha. Story 8. Bambi. The first time that Batman was animated was in 1968. Bambi came out in 1942. Compared to the first Batman series that came out in 1968, Bambi is so smooth. The technique they used for both is the exact same, but one is 26 years older than the other and still looks better. Not to mention that they were working on Bambi while WW2 was happening. Story 9. Game in a series, but Metal Gear Solid 2. Only by a decade and change. But given that it's the only one that called the situation so precisely, and that everyone considered it an incomprehensible mind screw when the game came out, and then retroactively was horrified by the accuracy once they could understand it because it happened, it's pretty incredible. Everything the Patriots feared and tried to prevent via the S3 plan came to pass. Since objective reality is a fiction created by group consensus, the internet creating the ability for every possible point of view to create a group consensus via isolated individuals and small groups linking together across the planet killed the concept of objective reality. There is no truth, only opinion. Every opinion has alternative facts to back them that are as thick and long as every other opinions. The mimetic concept of reality has broken down to the point where there are numerous competing realities with minimal overlap, leading to chaos and the entire world getting closer and closer to the brink. Story 10. Babylon 5 and Star Trek Deep Space Nine were both heavily serialized when this was only just starting to be a thing. Highly episodic, The Next Generation was still on the air when they started. Now you're hard-pressed to find a current sci-fi series that isn't 100% ongoing story arcs. Story 11. The Congress. 2013, movie starring Robin Wright. New enough that it's not way ahead of its time, but definitely think they kinda predicted more or less where I envision us. We're headed with AI in regards to the entertainment industry, and furthermore, where we might be headed in the future in regards to what VR might eventually become. Story 12. Mr. Robot. While a lot of the themes and thought-provoking commentary can apply to our present-day lives, it was way ahead of its time, and to this very day, not many people have even heard of or even seen it. Honorable mention to the Kingdom of Bullshit speech in the S1 finale. 20 years later from now, and that speech will be just as relevant in society as it was back in 2015 and now. It's absolutely timeless. Story 13. I wish Lost was made in the streaming era with a smaller scale and more focused story arc. It was such a cool concept, but it being on network TV and being continuously extended made it really bloat with characters and plot. I'd have loved to see it in the streaming era with like 4 10-episode seasons or something like that. The concept and the use of flashbacks and flash-forwards was groundbreaking. It just suffered from being too big for its own good. Still love that show, though. Story 14. Clue. Movies or TV shows that are adapted from other media have usually been books. Sometimes you'd get a TV show that was a movie first. That is Weird Science, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ace Ventura, Beetlejuice, etc. But it was usually just book becomes movie TV, and maybe there's a toy line. That's it. Then people were like, let's be crazy and pick a board game. And we got Clue. Story 15. I want to say House Maryland. Not the entire series, of course, but there were several episodes that portrayed social issues in a way that is relevant even today. Yes, the series started in 2004 and ended in 2011, so we are only over a decade removed from it. But there were episodes that covered LGBTQ, homelessness, perils of social media oversharing online, mental illness, etc. Also, the simulations of things going on in the body hold up remarkably well even today. Story 16. Community. 100%. One of my all-time favorite TV shows. I don't think any other shows was doing what it was doing at the time. Mind you, I watched this in 2020, and I still felt like it was ahead of its time had it been made then. I had so much fun watching that show, although I had mixed feelings with the later seasons. Story 17. Rubicon. Political, deep state thriller with James Badge Dale as a codebreaker that stumbles into something he shouldn't have. Real slow burner, immense character development, dialogue, and plot. If it premiered now, it would be getting multiple seasons green-lit. Still one of the best of the pre-renaissance of television shows. Story 18. Star Trek. Deep Space Nine. It gets a lot of flack for not being true to Roddenberry's vision of a utopian future, but not only did it ground the utopian concept by showing the sometimes dark underbelly required to make it a reality, but it frankly went where no one has really gone before. In a drama series with concepts of good and evil, there was a very thin vein of each and a rich collection of gray areas in between. Television of its time was very one-dimensional, and it was at the forefront of a lot of concepts we now take for granted. If the stories and character profiles were transposed into a more realistic or historical setting, it would be right up there in terms of awards and ratings. Story 19, the BBC miniseries Threads. It's about nuclear war, and specifically dropping a nuclear bomb on Sheffield. It's pretty old, but it is brutal in its depiction. It's shot almost like a documentary of what happens in the aftermath. I watched it straight through one day, and it really shook me up. One of the many storylines is of a couple that were out doing their separate thing when the bomb dropped and them attempting to reunite. I remember my wife was off in another city for work that day, and I couldn't shake thinking how I would try and find her if it happened to me. Story 20. The Prisoner television series, 1967. Well ahead of its time on how the powerful use technology to attain and use information for manipulation and control of the masses. It is a social allegory about the individual's struggle for freedom against an oppressive, multi-ethnic, multicultural village, always spying and playing social games. Computers, psychology, and misinformation are key tools, always bubbling in the background of every episode. I really recommend watching this series because you can see it in many ways. An action spy show, a social commentary about mass/social/technological media manipulation, or a subversive about essay on today's democracy and dominant control. It's just a fascinating, scary art piece about the global village and how people are processed in it. This show needs a real remake. Christopher Nolan has been trying to do something with it for 15 years, and I really hope he tackles it this time after Oppenheimer. Story 21. Battlestar Galactica's non-episodic style was made for binging, and increased TV production values helped sell the sci-fi elements. Breaking Bad, for obvious reasons, took the serial drama to the next level. The practice had interweaving arcs over multiple episodes, great for streaming, bad for cable. Citizen Kane was so influential that it comes off as boring now because the cinematography has been copied so much. Rome, 2005, could have been a gigantic hit on streaming, but its cost per episode was too high for HBO at the time. Twin Peaks is so absurd it might still be ahead of even now, LOL. Story 22. There was a show called Great Scott that came out in 1992, I believe, and starred Tobey Maguire. It was a family sitcom that was filmed in the style of Malcolm in the Middle, but came out years before and had cutaways like Scrubs and Family Guy, but years ahead of those shows as well. It only lasted for 6 episodes, but within the next few years, practically every show on TV was following the format of Great Scott. However, no one actually remembers this show, and it's almost impossible to find. Story 23, Man-Seeking Woman, FX show on Hulu. Basically, it sounds like your typical How I Met Your Mother copy, but it's a lot more insightful. Yeah, the main guy is lonely, depressed, but they do show at times how relationship won't automatically fix his life. The women in the show tend to have a lot of agency, and the characters are actually self-aware of how perhaps they should be better people. It actually makes the few instances of romance in the show feel genuinely earned as opposed to a cop-out. Such an underrated gem. Story 24. Jurassic Park and Walking with Dinosaurs both look visually impressive, with the former still looking better than most CGI of today, and the latter still not looking too bad, as well as making dinosaurs seem like fast animals, as well as being more intelligent than the slow, lumbering beasts from before. Story 25 Police Squad was the TV series that eventually spun off into the Naked Gun movies, same guys that did Airplane, and eventually Top Secret and Hot Shots, same exact style of humor. The show was canceled after 6 episodes because the network was concerned that the rapid pace and blink and you'll miss it setup of the jokes meant that people wouldn't want to watch it because they'd actually have to watch the show to enjoy the humor. Zaz, the writer-director trio, eventually kind of fell off in terms of quality, but both Airplane and Top Secret are considered pinnacles of classic 80s comedy, but only in hindsight. Story 26 Colony. The part where you see the government is run by the most criminal humans to enforce totalitarian labor camps to benefit the 0.01% that administer the military and enforce the laws. And at the top is a former network television CEO. The algorithm to find the best humans to run the world was altered to find the best humans that could be controlled to enslave and the world. And it was all being done by an advanced AI race on the premise that an enemy was coming and they were enslaving us for our own good. Series ended before we really see the enemy, but I'd guess the enemy was actually trying to save humanity from the AI using them. Story 27. I remember, back before that came out, the only thing people knew was that Verhoeven, from RoboCop and Total Recall, was directing, and that the book was basically about soldiers in mech suits going from basic training to fighting bug aliens on distant planets. So the general early internet consensus was that we were getting sci-fi Full Metal Jacket, and lots of geeks nerds at the time were all hyped up for that, praising Verhoeven for bringing something for them. Then, the actual trailers came out, and there were 0 shots of the mech suits. At first, people thought it was just saving them for the actual movie. But when people realized that there were going to be 0 mech suits in the movie itself, people started to turn. There was some talk about how maybe the suits were too expensive, but if they keep the serious story there, it'll be all right. Then the actual satirical film came out, and the outrage was off the charts. And, at the time, the highest driver for early ticket sales were the self-same geeks and nerds that were now either personally outraged about the sacrilege of a film, or those getting their opinions of it from the same internet forums where the outraged ones were complaining. So, low ticket sales to start, which meant it was deemed a box office failure, and those who would have gone to see it on the strength of being a Verhoeven satire also wrote it off as a failure and never went either. The biggest thing I remember were people saying that If it had just been some independently created film that didn't use the name Starship Troopers or Rico or claim it was based on the Heinlein novel, the geeks and nerds of the day would have been more likely to accept it on its own merits instead of decrying it for killing their beloved book, and that it wouldn't prevent a true adaptation from ever being made. Story 28. Check out Jodorowsky's Dune. He was going to make some kind of 14-hour-long movie. Naturally, the whole project imploded under its own weight, but the set design Bible got split into Blade Runner, Alien, and a few other movies that don't come to mind at the moment. Story 29. Misfits of Science. Misfits of Science was a TV series about a group of people with superpowers. It had good cast and some interesting ideas about X-Men like groups in a real-world setting and a cool soundtrack. Unfortunately, it came out in 1985, long before this sort of thing was common. Marvel and DC and countless adaptations of independent comics and original characters on TV and streaming have made this a normal thing today, but back then it wasn't yet. Some of the creative talents involved went on to make heroes many years later, but the mid-'80s was simply not yet the time. The show had top stars like Dean Martin's son as the token normal, the girl from the Bruce Springsteen video before she married Batman and became one of the friends as a telekinetic, the guy who had played the Predator and Bigfoot as a scientist who could shrink to doll size, the dad from ALF as bureaucrat. They didn't try for special effects or costumes that would look silly, and overall was a very good attempt at what it did just many years too soon. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it, be sure to write comments and share your stories.